Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Southern Cross Drive podcast, where we speak about everything to do with the Two Oceans Half Marathon. As always, I have your coach here for this is Coach Devlin. Dev, how are things going? How was your Valentine's Day? Because that has just been Valentine's Day weekend.
Yeah, Shona, welcome. Firstly, good to be back. Valentine's, I felt like was probably a little bit more pressure than the run training at the moment to make sure that it was a good day. But yeah, it was a good weekend and lots of fun here.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I know that generally runners tend to prioritize their running, and so I just wanted to make sure that you have your general life priorities right. So I know your wife and I know her well. I don't want her to kill me, so let's not do that. But guys, today we're going to be talking about a whole things in and around how you're pacing your long runs. We've had a lot of questions around I haven't run yet race pace yet. Should I be running at race pace? And so we're going to be diving into a lot of that. Also in and around injuries, because you may be picking up a couple of niggles around this time, and we really want to dive into what you should be doing about that. So, but before we start there, as always, Dave, we're 6 weeks out now, really the crunch time of things. What are some of the things that we should be focusing on now?
Yeah, so going back to my usual, we building volume still. Again, we're still nowhere near the peak necessarily, but we are at a much higher volume state at the moment. We're still in that speed endurance block. So really important that we're getting, if you are running intervals and you are doing the right kind of intervals, that you are recovering well enough. So I really, as much as we are picking up the volume, I still want that recovery to be a really, really big focus. And obviously that leads into a lot of what we'll be discussing today. But making sure that the pace is right, those long runs are building gradually, and we're not putting too much into the loads just yet. I spoke about it in the last episode where we may be dispersing our load a little bit more. So midweek easy runs are getting slightly longer, and that's still all right for us to be doing. But really a time like for us to be noticing and listening to our bodies at this stage as well. Because we are really in the thick of things at the moment. We've still got a fair amount of training to come. We need to make sure that we can get that and can be as consistent as possible.
Yep, excellent. Great stuff, Dev. And guys, just so you know, we've had a couple of questions coming in, and that's why we really wanted to dive into this today. Was around, people saying, "Oh, well, you told me to do easy and long runs, and I'm doing some speed endurance aspects, but I'm not running anything at race pace." So should you be running any of your training runs at race pace, Dev?
Yeah, so I generally say no. And there's that kind of is the broad spectrum. If you are, however, a 75-minute to a 90-minute runner, for example, and you're on the faster end of the field, I have mentioned in the past of maybe bringing in a second intensity session into some of the weeks. And one of those, call it intensity sessions, might be a race pace type session. However, that race pace session is still not you doing a 3-hour run at race pace. That's going to be a shorter run. It's going to be what we refer to as maybe a steady state kind of effort. It's half marathon, maybe 10K kind of race pace, but you're doing that session for about 50 minutes to an hour, obviously with a warm up and cool down or easy sections on either side of that. It's not a long run at race pace. Remember, I've spoken about the recovery here. I'm not trying to kill you in the training at this phase, and we're not trying to test you. We've spoken again in the past about racing regularly and testing ourselves and where we are condition-wise. That is not what the purpose of our training runs are and our long runs are. We really want to make sure that we're getting there as fresh as possible. We're achieving the runs as we're supposed to, so as the desired effect or physiological effect from that run, but still recovering quick enough that it doesn't have any effect on the next training session or next week's training session where the load might still be a little bit higher. If I can just maybe dive into the physiology a little bit deeper, and the reason why I say we need to be doing the easy runs at a slower pace and not race pace kind of effort. For what we're training for, so in this instance, a half marathon. Now, again, regardless of whether you're a 90-minute runner or a 3-hour half marathon runner, we basically are trying to train, or we have two main energy systems. One is what we refer to as our anaerobic energy system, which is in the absence of oxygen and really uses predominantly carbohydrates as your fuel source. And then we've got the aerobic energy system, which is within the presence of oxygen. And that oxidization then uses carbohydrates, fats as a fuel source as well. All right. Now, none of them are ever working in complete isolation. We're always using both those energy systems to some degree, obviously a little bit more depending on what kind of intensities and durations that we are running at. That said, our anaerobic threshold, so if we're running at an anaerobic threshold, so kind of what we can maintain for about a 30 to 40 minute effort, we've only got fuel stores for about that duration. All right. Now, if we are pushing ourselves at race pace, which is where we start now getting much closer to that anaerobic threshold point, if we're running at that point too often, what happens is our aerobic efficiency or our aerobic threshold starts to drop. Our aerobic threshold is where we become a more efficient runner. So it's how our body becomes more efficient at utilizing and providing fuel to the right parts of the body for the right intensities. So now if that aerobic threshold starts to detrain because we're training too close to the anaerobic threshold, when we do get to a point in a race where we are tired and we do hit the wall or we get that bonking sort of effect, we drop to that lowest common denominator, if you'd like, so your anaerobic threshold. And if that is at a detrained effect, that's actually worse off. You're less efficient at providing the energy that you needed. Your relative intensity is much lower, which means you're actually running slower. So now you get to race day, you've pushed yourself a little bit too hard, or you're pushing yourself too hard in these training runs, and now that aerobic threshold, or your lowest common denominator, is much lower, so ultimately affecting your time and your pace over a longer period of time, which has a much worse effect than what it has if you were just training and improving that aerobic threshold. So that's the first thing. The second thing, obviously, the faster and harder we are training more regularly, the more demand it has on our muscles and our joints. So there's a higher risk of injury, higher risk of overtraining, higher risk of illness along the way. We are trying to make sure, as I said, you're as fresh as possible for the next training session, for the next week's training sessions, as well as getting to race there as fresh as possible for you to still be able to put out a much higher relative intensity on race day when it really counts.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm so glad you asked that, because that was where I was going to go. Oh, well, you mentioned that because that's where I was going to go next, is essentially you say, if you're running easy enough and you're easy in your long runs, it allows you to run hard enough in your hard runs, which is what we're looking for. But how should we be pacing those hard runs or those intervals essentially? Are they all out efforts? What's the sort of pacing, the strategy that we use there?
Yeah, so again, in this particular phase of the training as well, with us being in our now I've lost my complete train of thought here. Our speed endurance phase, no, they are not supposed to be maximal effort intervals. So we're talking 3-minute intervals, 4-minute intervals, for example, some of those steady state kind of runs. You cannot a max effort. If I had to go true max effort, you can probably sustain a true max effort for about 10 to 15 seconds. And from there, you just can't sustain that anymore. And this is the thing, that if you try and push yourself too hard in a 4-minute interval, for example, there's no ways you can sustain that. And there's going to be this massive drop off. And that drop off is going to be quite significant. So at this phase of the training, the intervals should be firm. There should be a hard session, but we're not training at max. We are pushing you out of a comfort zone. It really shouldn't be a pleasant session necessarily. But if you're doing 4x4 minute intervals, for example, each of those 4-minute intervals should be consistent in terms of pace. You should be able to sustain the pace for the whole 4 minutes. And more importantly, your first interval and your last interval should still be able to be at the same pace. You shouldn't have this fast first interval and then not be able to maintain that. That's usually an indication that you've gone out too hard. You're not recovering well enough between those intervals. And we are just pushing yourself a little bit too hard for that particular session.
Yeah, definitely. I see that happen all the time. And that's why people are also getting injured and all the rest, which is what we'll talk about a little bit later. But Dev, when we're talking around these long and easy runs again, let's just go back to that. One of the things you've spoken about before, one of the things we quite like to do is to, if people find they're running those sessions too fast, and they always say, can't slow down. I don't know how people think they just go from walking to sprinting, but we often suggest to them to then bring that intensity down by adding in a couple of walk breaks. So how often do we walk? How long do we walk for? What is your strategy for that?
Yeah, so walk breaks are fantastic, and as you said, it's a really good way for you to bring the intensity down. And it's not a Sunday stroll, so I just want to get that out the way. If I say a walk break, and we talk about walk break strategies in racing as well, it's not there just, okay, go, let's just plod along, Sunday stroll, have a chat to someone. The idea here is those walk breaks are still a very brisk walk, but we're just allowing the body to take a bit of that eccentric loading off the legs. We're allowing the heart rate to come down. So we're just bringing everything to definitely not a state of rest because we're still in a training session, but just to bring all the intensity and everything down a little bit, catching our breath for us to then be able to continue again. And it really is important that when we implement walk breaks, we are not sprinting in between. So that's something that's also really important. I see it a lot, is a lot of people say, okay, cool, I'm bringing the walk breaks in to bring the intensity down, but when I am running, I'm pushing as hard as I can in the run segments. It's not. Your run still needs to be at your easy relative intensity, but the walk breaks, as I said, is just to bring the heart rate down if you do struggle, and also to take a little bit of that loading off the legs. We generally work on a sliding scale, though, in terms of how often and how long you should be walking for. So if you're a faster runner or you've been running for many years, you can probably get away with slightly shorter walk breaks, so 45 to 60 second type of durations, and you can extend those to maybe 6 to 8 kilometers or maybe every 10 kilometers, whatever it is, depending on your level. If you are the back of a pack runner, if you're a novice and new to running and you're kind of building up your volume, it will be a slightly longer walk break, so 60 to 90 seconds maybe, and playing around there maybe every 2 to 3 kilometers. So it really is important that you figure out what works best for you. And it's important that you are doing these now in your training runs. I generally like to say any run longer than an hour, you should be bringing in those walk breaks, not walking when the run gets to an hour or longer. So if you're doing a 3-hour run, don't only start walking at an hour, start implementing those walk breaks early. So early and often. And this is something that you should be doing now in training, so you're also getting used to it, so that when we do get to race day, when we are going to talk about strategy, we are going to implement a walk break into your race strategy, that you are comfortable doing it, you know how to do it and how often to be doing it. With that as well is don't be scared of walking the hills. So we give you a pace. You definitely don't need to be trying to hold on to that pace running up a hill, because there goes the relative intensity. You're not running easy enough. You're pushing yourself too hard. Slow the pace down, or if it's a steep hill or a long hill, break it up. Do a quick 30, 40-second walk break, then get back into some easy running, then break it up again. So those, again, really help you prolong that fatigue level. It just means you can sustain an effort for a lot longer. And when it comes to race day, I can promise you now, there's going to be a massive benefit to this. Lindsay has spoken to this point in racing as well, often, where you'll see people running away from you and you think, oh, geez, I'm walking and there goes everyone. There goes the pace, goal time, whatever it might be. But later into this run, when you're getting to 15, 16 Ks into the run, you start reining all those people in again because they've gone out way too fast. They haven't done any walk breaks along the way, and now they're forced to walk. And I think that's a really important point. You need to be doing the early and often walk breaks that you're not walking when you're forced to walk. You want to be walking as part of your strategy.
Yeah, this podcast is called the Southern Cross Drive podcast. So you are going to be doing tackling that at a later stage, and we are going to dive into that, as Dev says, in a couple of episodes' time, as to how to tackle your race day walking. I think what Dev is really focusing on here, though, for now, is the training walking and adding that into your training to bring that intensity down for sure. So, really, really good stuff. Dev, what do we do if someone's injured at the moment? I mean, and injury could be anything from keeping them out of training to a niggling sort of pain. I mean, it's been a couple of weeks. We're essentially 6 weeks out now, so I can imagine that some people are picking up a couple of niggles. What are we doing about those at the moment?
If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsay and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah. Unfortunately, never completely preventable. Like you say, we are in the middle of our training cycle at the moment. So big training loads, there is a risk of the injury and little niggles creeping in. We obviously don't want it. We never like it, but it is something that is, I won't say inevitable, but there generally is quite a lot of it at this phase. Now is the time to be sorting these problems out. Guys, we are 6 weeks out from race day. Rather lose a few days now, whether it means you need to rest and just give it a chance to rest up, see if it feels better in 2 to 3 days time before you're getting back into training. Or if it's something that is a little bit more serious or is quite painful, you're struggling with, don't push through this now in your training sessions where you're then risking getting to race day injured or continuing and carrying on that injury or actually turning that injury into something a lot more serious where now instead of losing 2 or 3 days this week because of an injury that you need to go and see a doctor about, it now becomes something way more serious that puts you out for 3 or 4 weeks. Then it's just jeopardizing your entire race itself. So it really is important at this phase, get these issues sorted out. Whether that means you need to go and consult with a doctor and have a scan done or have something checked out, whether it means you just need to go to a physio and maybe get a little bit of manipulation, treatment, massage, whatever it might be. Now's the time to do it. Listen to the body and make sure that you are adjusting things in your training accordingly. I really want to drive this point home. You are not going to lose anything if you miss out. Let's say, for instance, in your training week, you miss 4 days because you need to be laid off and you need to take a bit of a break. In that 4 days, the likelihood is you're probably only missing 2 runs. 2 runs out of your entire training cycle, if you are consistent, is insignificant and you are not going backwards, you're not losing conditioning. So I would rather you lose 2 runs now than lose 3 weeks worth of training later on. The strength training again is, here we go, broken record, Dev again, but the strength training is absolutely critical. Not too late. If you're not doing it already, I can't urge you enough to get stuck into that. It really is important around the injury point of view. And then also making sure that the recovery is there. So I know we've done the podcast recently on, or previous episode around recovery and recovery weeks and recovery strategies. So go back and listen to that. We go into quite a bit more detail there as well. But make use of things like regular foam rolling or potential massage if that's something that your body deals well with. Because that's also, I like to refer to that as general running maintenance. Same as a Ferrari needs to be serviced, you need to be servicing your body in the kind of training loads that you guys are doing at the moment.
Yeah, I can't agree with those things more. And yeah, definitely one of the things that I think people struggle with, because we keep always saying to them, don't push through the pain, right? So how do you distinguish? How does a runner wake up in the morning and go, oh, this is a slight niggle, or I'm just getting old. I mean, I've turned 40 and I know what that is feeling like waking up in the morning. But how do you distinguish between, oh, this is an injury and it's pain, it's really bad, or it's actually okay and it's just old age?
Yeah, so I think maybe before we distinguish between sort of the niggles and the pain, serious injury stuff, it's also to distinguish between pain and stiffness and a little bit of tiredness. That's another thing where some people might be a little bit too panicky and they wake up going, oh, my quad's really sore this morning. I don't think I should run. Is it an injury or is it just a bit of stiffness from maybe a tough gym session yesterday? An indicate or a way of figuring that out is start a warm up. So if you do some sort of mobility work and you do some dynamic movement and maybe some light running or cycling, you'll feel quite quickly that your body kind of shakes that out and you think, okay, you know what, this is actually maybe just a bit of soreness from yesterday's session, bit of stiffness, really nothing to worry about. From a pain and discomfort point of view, it is also then important to now distinguish what level that is and what can we push through and what can't we push through. Now, maybe that's wrong. We obviously don't want to necessarily be pushing through, and we kind of always advise around it. But if you are in pain at night, for example, so while you're sleeping, you wake up in the middle of the night and your legs are really sore, your knees really sore, that for me is a really good indication that you should stop running immediately. So take a day or two off, go and have it checked out and make sure it's nothing serious. As runners, we are scared of doctors, or we're scared of going to check things out. So if I'm in pain, it's fine. I'll run through it. I'll run it off tomorrow morning. I don't need to go and see anyone. Guys, go and do it. Please go and have it checked out. Let's rather rule something out than come back and go, hang on, we missed this and we've got a broken toe or a fractured femur or whatever it might be. Those are quite extreme, but you know what I'm saying there. So pain at night is generally a good indication that no running tomorrow. Let's go and have that checked out. If you've got any discomfort when you start the run, so in the day you wake up, you're a little bit sore, you start your session a little bit sore, but that discomfort dissipates throughout, you're okay, you can continue that run, even if it means you might need to just slow the pace down a little bit for that day. But if that pain or that discomfort dissipates pretty early on into that session, you're good. Let's continue with the training session. If you've got discomfort at the beginning of a session and it stays the same throughout, you can get away with finishing the run. I would recommend just adjusting things to slow that down. So if you've got an interval session today, don't go and do an interval session. Rather do an easy run and see how it feels throughout. But if that stays the same, manage the run. You can get through it, but I would still recommend going to have it checked out because tomorrow it might be a little bit worse. So I would have it looked at some point. And then obviously if you have discomfort at the beginning of a training session, you go out and you run, but it gets worse throughout that session. Don't try and push through that session going, maybe just now it'll stop. Maybe just now it'll stop. If it's gotten worse than it was when it started, it's a sign that it's only going to continue to get worse. Stop that training session. Hopefully you're not too far from home. You'll know it quite quickly. Stop, walk back, and then definitely please go and have it checked out. Like I said, now's the time to get these problems sorted out. We don't want you having to worry about this and to just be at the back of your mind, also stressing you out coming closer to race day.
Yeah, definitely. And Dev, it's mid-February. I have a bit of a sniffle at the moment. And as we're changing seasons, I know that people tend to get sick. What about illness and sickness? How does that apply at this phase in our training?
Yeah, so the principles I mentioned around injury apply exactly the same here. So rather take a day off or a day or two off, sleep a little bit extra. Remember, sleep is a really great recovery tool. Focus on your nutrition, focus on your hydration, take a day's rest, and let's see, maybe you feel better in a day or two. You haven't lost anything in the training. If it's something that maybe persists, I would definitely recommend going to have it checked out, seeing a doctor if you need some sort of medication, whatever it might be. So that is really important. Keep in mind that any form of training you do, so we talk about the systemic breakdown of training and the little damage to the muscles and all that and how it can affect your recovery. It's doing exactly the same thing to your immune system. So every single training session you do has a negative effect on your immune system. So it's compromised. So it's easier to get sick. And that's why you'll tend to find now when you're in peak training, you are more susceptible to getting sick because you're at higher volumes. Your body's under so much more stress. So your immune system is taking quite a knock. I've got an athlete who got sick last week before a race she was supposed to do, decided that she was going to go out and just do an easy run because she needs to run and felt really bad, cut the run short. Next day, went out to try and do a slightly longer run, cut the run short, ran 3 days in a row, tried a time trial. And at the end of the day, all that's happening there is you're just prolonging your recovery from that. So again, the immune system's taking more of a knock, you're digging yourself into a deeper hole that now you potentially making what was just a little bit of a sniffle or a head cold. You've now turned it into a full-blown cold and you need antibiotics and you can't train for 2 weeks. And the more you train, the longer it takes you to recover. So now we're just putting off quality of training rather than, again, having lost a few days early on and getting it out the way. So I would see illness exactly the same sort of approach to it as an injury would be. Get it sorted out now so it doesn't affect you later on into the training cycle.
Yeah, and we don't have enough time for this in this podcast, but essentially, I mean, guys, like illness, if you're training through that, it's risky, and it's if it's viral in particular, it's very dangerous, you know. And again, I'm not trying to fearmonger, but you just want to make sure that you know that we can run forever, right? It's not just this year, not just 2025. We want to be able to run forever. So your health is no more important than Two Oceans Half Marathon 2025. So please go and make sure that you are looking after yourselves. And Dev, yeah, I have been getting a couple of friends lately who are peak training coming up to me going, you know, oh my gosh, but you know, my husband's doing X and I'm not doing enough clearly. Or, you know, I've had a couple of people at the running clubs come up to me and be like, well, you know, so-and-so is only running X number of miles. You know, is that enough? You know, what do we say to those guys? I mean, we're in a pretty peak block of training now. I mean, you know, race day is looming. You know, what do we say to people who just feel like they're so overwhelmed with everyone else's training and what everyone else is saying?
Yeah, Shona, the easiest way to do this is to go out for a run on your own, come back and lock yourself in a room. But obviously, I'm definitely not advising that. Look, it is quite difficult. We run in running clubs, we're in groups, we're on Strava, whatever it is, and everyone has a comment. I had someone pass comment on my training load this last week, and that person doesn't know where I am in my training, doesn't know what my sort of build up is at the same time. So no one knows where you are specifically for what you're training at and at your level. So as much as I would like to say ignore people, I know that's not always easy, but just keep in mind that you are on your own journey. Everyone is on their own journey. So if everyone's training for Two Oceans Half, the fact of the matter is everyone's at a slightly different level or came into the training cycle slightly differently or whatever it might be. And that includes your spouse or your partner or work colleagues or anything. And that becomes a little bit more difficult, because what does it do to your relationship when your spouse is going out on a 3-hour run at a 4 minutes a K and you should be doing a 2-hour run at a 7 minutes a K?
Yeah, don't have these conversations on Valentine's Day.
Definitely don't do that.
Yeah.
But it really is important that you're doing what's right for you and sticking to your training. Now, a big one here is I talk about don't cherry pick advice as well. So I'm not saying you have to listen to me. I am not the guru in all things training, all right? But if you are going to listen to me, then listen to only me. And the same applies if you've got another coach or another program that you're following. There's nothing wrong with that, but stick to that program and that coach's advice. The minute you start, and we see this so often where people think I'm following this plan and I'm going to run this session, but I saw someone else's plan in that club or that person's running intervals. Let me do that interval session as well because intervals are fun. And then, hang on, there's another one there. Let me go and do that session. You kind of pulling yourself in completely opposite directions, and it becomes so overwhelming with the amount of advice out there and everyone is an expert that you really have no idea where to go. And you're going to get to this point where you hit panic stations and you go, hang on, I'm now 4 weeks out from training or 3 weeks out from training, and I might be picking up a little bit of an injury, but I don't know what I've done wrong and where and how do I fix the problem now. So I really want to just try and urge you to listen to one chain or avenue of advice, stick to what your journey is. And the same really goes for groups. I really want to caution people around running in groups. I love the idea of you running with a running club for safety purposes, for chaos in the environment and the camaraderie around it. But I still do advise that you stick to your training pace. So find a group that either is at your level, or if it's only a group of 10 runners and everyone's at a slightly different level, run at your pace. Don't try and hang on to the pace or the intensity of that group if they are faster than you, because there is a risk of you just picking up an injury or getting sick. I suppose the flip side happens where if you're running with a group of people and you are the faster runner of the group, then don't push them and put pressure on them. Go up the road. I run with a couple of friends. I run with Shona. Shona runs faster than I do. And Shona and her partner run up the road and come back for me, or they wait for me somewhere along. There's ways around it. So it really is important that you're on your journey, you stick to what you're doing, and also trust the process that you're on.
Yeah, I love that. Trust the process, guys, because that'll be so key on race day, to trust that process. And if you've done everything right, if you've followed one source, when you're standing on that line, you're going to be so confident that you've done everything right. So yeah, that is it. Dev, as always, again, huge amounts of value. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Really, really appreciate it. Yeah, guys, 6 weeks out. Here we go. Looking forward to next week when we see you again and we dive into 5 weeks out and where to take it from there. But for now, yeah, cheers. Have an awesome week, and we'll see you again next week.
Happy training, everyone.